will let you know after reading those documents. I will let you know that we are going to rock this. It's going to be fantastic. I think that we've set ourselves up to write a stellar proposal moving forward. We of course are going to spend a lot of time diving more into the RFP, asking additional questions. There's still a little bit of a vagueness associated with the specificity around how far pathways have to be developed, but it looks like they're asking for plans, not super specific, which is what we anticipated. We have all of the required pieces, I believe, to make this move forward. After my reads of this document, it really is focused on investment. And what I mean by that, it's really focused on trying to find ways to create something with this impulse of money that will be able to last over time. And sustainability is a big piece of this work. And so thinking about what other monies can be leveraged to be able to support this work moving forward. And so this is about building some infrastructure that can be supported by institutions and organizations to make this grant move forward. Michael Wangler, did you want to add anything more, or Laurie, Beth, any of you who've read the proposal so far, if you wanted to add anything else to that?
I've still got to look at it. I'm excited. I didn't realize it was going to be out so early. So after this, I'm right there.
I'll make a comment about the self-assessment checklist. And when you read that for qualifying for phase one, we check all the boxes, and it's clear that, as Carlos said, we're going to be able to submit a strong proposal for phase one and get rolling on this right away.
Okay, so we anticipate taking additional time over the next few days to really come up with a strong action plan that we can present to this team by next Friday about how we're going to move forward on this. I'm meeting with Kim Wilcox and Tomas Morales, Isaac Waldab, Isaac from Riverside Community College District, Diane Rodriguez, Ted Alejandre, Edwin Gomez today, Sheila Thornton, Michelle Decker, and with Paul Granillo from the Inland Economic Partnership to talk about bringing in folks for the steering committee. I presented them the list that we generated here. We will have conversations about, inclusion of additional CBOs, other partners, other important entities in the region for the steering committee, and then a final decision on the LEA. I'm still pushing San Bernardino Community College District for that work, and all that's going to occur today. And I'll inform this group as soon as I get some decisions from them. In the meantime, we're going to need letters of commitment from folks. We'll probably need some support with writing, and the folks from that have been helping from GIA in the pathway groups will be reaching out to people to get some more of that information. We're going to have to be very clear about what's required in the RFP. What are the kinds of documents we need to support, and we'll be requesting those from you as we move forward. And we'll find out more. And I encourage you to take a look at the RFP for phase one, and please be prepared to ask questions as we begin moving forward. At the last meeting, we spent some time talking about what are some of the important components of pathways and how they can be developed. And we're refining a document that's going to be able to specify lots of clear components of what those pathways, what good pathways look like, that we can use as a template to be able to start describing what those pathways can be identified as, look like, and how they could be evaluated. So this is like criteria. And we'll be sharing that with you at the next meeting. The last piece of the puzzle we need to do in anticipation of the release today of the RFP was some discussion about clusters and sectors. And Jackie Melendez, the director of the Inland Empire Growth and Opportunity, i.e. GO, will be talking to us, teaching us about clusters and sectors as a way to kind of focus the region on specific areas. And then Mike Goss, the director for the Center of Excellence he's at Chafee, but he works for the Community College Foundation, I think, right, Mike? I don't know. You can clarify that. But yeah, he'll be talking about some industry projections and data. He's a person who has a lot of familiarity with this. And then we are going to have Michael Wiafi, who was a member of the Recovery with Equity Task Force, co-author of the report, talk one more time about the recovery with equity components that are required in this grant. If you look at the breakdown of the point system for the grant, 12% of that is about this recovery with equity piece, and 12% is around the pathway creation. So they gave it a real high weight in this work. So we'll be hearing from them as we continue to digest what the RFP has laid out for us. Laurie or Michael or Beth or Ida, did I miss anything? Michael Wiafi, did I miss anything? Jackie, did I miss anything?
There's just one more thing to bring to the attention of the group, which is next Friday, there is going to be a phase 1 grant application webinar. So if you go to the page with the RFP, there's a place where you can register for that. It's next Friday, the 8th from 10:30 to 11:30.
Thank you. All right. Let's go ahead and get started with these presentations. Jackie, I'm turning it over to you.
Woohoo.
We can't hear you, Jackie.
All right, you can hear me now? Wonderful. Okay, so what I was saying is I have a very short amount of time because we have some really great presentations today. So I'm going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to talk about some terms that we keep sort of throwing around. And some of them can be used interchangeably, but these are really terms that we should really be looking at. So for those of you who are new today, my name is Jackie Melendez. I am the Executive Director of the Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity, or IEGO. And we have been working with this group and helping to shape and working with GIA, doing amazing things in this space. People always ask me, who is IEGO? We are a network. We are a regional network serving both counties. And we were formed around the question and the conversation of how do we improve quality of life and quality of jobs? And also, how do we help to bring investment to the region? We all know that the Inland Empire does not get the private and public funds that we are due. And so efforts like this and you being here today are helping us to change that narrative. So thank you all for being here. I want to start, my background is really economic development. I have a master's in urban and regional planning. I've been studying cities my whole life. And before coming to IEGO, I worked in local government for 18 years. Much of that was spent in redevelopment back in the day, in economic development. So what is economic development? Economic development is the creation of wealth from which community benefits are realized. It's more than a jobs program. It's an investment in growing our economy and enhancing the prosperity and quality of life for all of our residents. This comes from CalEd, which is the California Association for Local Economic Development. They're the premier organization, professional organization for economic developers in the state. And as you can imagine, they went through, rigorous conversations, as any of you who have been through mission and visioning statements, programs and processes know. But does this economic development definition, is it everything? Is the be all end all? Absolutely not. But it gives us a foundation for us to start to have conversations. There's a whole movement across the state and across the country, really, to kind of break apart some of these older traditional definitions, and to really talk about things like triple bottom line, and inclusion and equity. And what does that look like when we're doing economic development from a triple bottom line perspective, where we're not just looking at money, we're looking at impacts on communities, we're looking at impacts on the environment, impacts on people. And so this is a really important conversation that's happening all around the country. And so, when I first got into economic development, it was all about location, location, location. That was like the main thing when you're looking at bringing a company into a region or into a city. That started to change. It was about jobs, jobs, jobs. And then that changed even more. Recently, I was at an international conference for economic developers, and they were saying workers, workers, workers. So workforce, and the things that we're doing in this K-16 initiative is really critical for the future economic development and the future inclusive economic development for our region. So with that, I want to say that each and every one of you here is really an economic developer. So you may say, I'm an engineer, I'm an educator. Really, all of the things and all of those activities, they are contributing as we look at human development, and as we look at, I'll talk a little bit about the pathways and the sectors and all these terms that we all use. And I'm not an economist, but you don't have to be an economist to have a basic understanding of how some of these terms impact the work that we do to increase wealth creation and the quality of life for our students, our residents, and our businesses. So really quickly, I left this slide in just to give a little bit of context about the Inland Empire, and it'll make sense in a few minutes. 44% of all the goods consumed in the US pass through our region. This is major. It shows how important logistics is to our area. And I'm going to use logistics as an example in a few minutes so you understand that we're 10% of the nation's warehouses. And so looking at, how do we disrupt? We got to work with what we have in the economy, but how do we disrupt the present state of the economy and shape the future so that it works for our students and our businesses and the folks that we serve? And so there's others. San Bernardino, Riverside counties, we rank 1 and 2 for worst air quality. There's a lot of pros and cons in this space. But as we're looking at economic solutions and strategies for how we're going to improve our economy, these are some of the things we have to look at. Population in the Inland Empire is huge. 58% of our population is Black and Latino. And so, we are a very diverse economy. And in many places, we're very young as well. So we could go in and talk a lot about all these things. But like I said, I have just a few minutes to talk about some really deep things. I wanted to spend a moment and talk about these pathways and how we set the pathways that we've been talking about in the K-16 space. How do we set that within the larger context of the regional economy and economic development? So I put this slide together here, and you have K through 16, these are our 4 pathways, right? Education, business administration, the engineering / computing, and healthcare. So these are the pathways that we're focusing on, and we're going to develop strategies in one or more of these spaces to move the needle, to be able to create a better future than what we have, a better positioning than we have today into these spaces. If you compare that to IEGO, we look at clusters and emerging clusters. So IEGO looks at logistics, which is why I talked a little bit about logistics earlier, and advanced manufacturing. These are 2 existing clusters, and I'm going to talk about clusters in just a second. These are 2 clusters, they're here. They're already here in the Inland Empire. And then we have 2 that are emerging, cyber / IT and green technology. Now, I want to, before I get into the definitions, I want to show you a local example. This box here on the right, the local example, this is a example of a local city here in the Inland Empire. And if you go to their economic development website, these are the 6 focus areas that they are concentrating their economic development efforts into in order to move the needle in those spaces. I can say sectors, and you'll see why we use these interchangeably. So logistics, retail, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, green technology, and e-commerce. I could spend an entire talk just talking about e-commerce and why cities care about e-commerce. Hint, 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 it has to do with sales tax, where the desk where you buy your boots, where you buy your stuff from Target, it matters. So this to give us a kind of an understanding, and then you're going to have Mike from Centers of Excellence talk. I'm sure he's going to talk about the 10 sectors that they're working on, and I actually have a slide here as well where I cut and pasted. So here's the sectors that they have identified for the Inland Empire, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap. And we'll talk about that in a second. So advanced manufacturing, advanced transportation and logistics, agriculture, business and entrepreneurship, education and human development, energy, construction and utilities. Number 7 is health. Information and communication, so IT, digital media, the life sciences. That's one that's a new or emerging one for them according to their report, which I highly recommend. Hopefully Mike will put the report in the chat, because it's a great report that came out last year about sectors. It's a sector analysis in the Inland Empire. And then you have public safety as a career cluster, and then retail, hospitality, and tourism. So if we look at these, what we're looking at is, Centers of Excellence comes out of the community colleges, right? So they're providing a report that says, hey, community colleges, 12 in the Inland Empire, these are the areas that you should be focusing your attention, because this is where we're really going to be able to create positive impact in our economy and for our students. So you're not out there where it's a focus strategy. We're out there and we're saying, okay, advanced manufacturing, let's take that and let's tackle that, and let's decide how we can create strategies and programs and services and partnerships and bring in businesses in advanced manufacturing so that we can create programs and services and benefit of our students and their future. Sound familiar for what we're doing for pathways in K through 16? So I want to take a pause really quickly before I jump into some definitions and see if everybody's with me. Give me a thumbs up if you're with me. If you have a question or a comment, or you're like, hey, yeah, I like this, or what is this woman talking about? Because I can nerd out when it comes to economic development. So any thoughts or questions? I see some, thank you, Conrad. I see a thumbs up there. When you're sharing your screen, how hard it is. Laurie, thank you for participating. It's much appreciated. I know the teacher and all of us love it. Thank you, Michael, when we actually are, when people participate. So, okay, so Mike, I hope you're nerding out on this with me as well. So really what I'm trying to do is I'm building bridges about how different types of entities, and remember what I said in the beginning, we are all economic developers, because any of us that is trying to work in the space of human development, trying to look at sectors, pathways, clusters, whatever we call them, any of us that is doing this work, we are actually impacting the future. And so really what these things are about, whether we're looking at clusters, a city that's, retail is going to be really important for cities, obviously, because that's how a city gets paid, right? So if you're doing local economic development in a city, you want restaurants, you want, you want Forever 21 to expand in your mall, because you know that a lot of folks are going to go and shop there, and that's going to turn into sales tax, right? So we all have these different things that we're doing this work for. When it comes to IEGO, we're very focused on clusters, and that's what I want to talk about next. Why would we care about clusters? What's the difference between a sector and an industry? And in K through 16, we're calling them pathways. But we're talking a lot about the same thing. So I made this ugly slide, but trust me, it works. And I was like, okay, let's try to make it pretty. And I was like, no, this is what it works. This is how it works. So if you think about a sector versus an industry, okay, a sector and industry, you can use those interchangeably, unless you're in front of an economist and then, they like to, pick it apart. But really, for the most part, most of us, sectors and industries are really interchangeable. The difference is when it's a sector, you're thinking about big portions of the economy. So the private sector, the public sector, right? And so I use public sector or government sector as an example, because we know, well, what does that mean? That could be education, right? That's public. That could be local government versus state government. So the sectors are really the big pieces. And then the industries, they're within each of those major sectors. But again, you're going to see this one used interchangeably the most. So a good example, the one that I always think of, is the auto industry. We know what that is. That's car sales, that's selling tires, that is, selling parts and all of those things. It's an industry that is surrounded around the car. Okay, so basic information there. Now, cluster, you'll hear me, if I can talk about the economy for 5 seconds, you're going to hear me talking about clusters. Now, why would we in economic development, why would we want to focus on clusters versus sectors? So if you go back to the last slides that I was showing you, and I'm going to put it into the way I see, centers for excellence. They have these 10, 11 sectors that we need to focus on, right? We need to have strategies in these areas. Well, if you think about us in K through 16, if you think about a city, they maybe have 1 or 2 people that are actually working in economic development. So we don't have unlimited resources in a world where we have to really focus our resources on really moving the needle in a short amount of time. Clusters is where you want to go, because a cluster is really where you're going to have the most impact in your economy. So an industry cluster, it's a group of firms that gain a competitive advantage through local proximity and interdependence. Think Hollywood, film production in Hollywood and Atlanta. Think, tech in Silicon Valley. The example, many of us were at the State of the Region. They gave an example of wine country, Napa, having a concentration of certain industries within a specific geographic area provides advantages in terms of people moving in between those firms, sharing ideas. Hey, I used to work for Facebook. Now I'm going to work over here at Google. I'm going to share all Facebook's secrets. And then now that's going to move this company. So when we're looking at clusters, and this is what economic developers do, even if you don't have a cluster, you're pushing to try to stack. I always think of like Monopoly, you don't want 4 hotels, you don't want 4 houses, you want a hotel, right? So let's say you're able to bring in an auto manufacturer who is manufacturing electric vehicles. Guess what? You're going to use that one firm, and you're going to try to stack it. And you're going to go to folks and you're going to say, hey, battery, folks that are making batteries for cars, come over to our area. Being in close proximity to these folks are going to help your business overall. So obviously, and if we can agree upon anything, or if you can get economists in a room to agree upon anything, they will tell you that the Inland Empire, major cluster in the Inland Empire, is logistics. It's not in every single community, we know that, but we are a huge part, and that's why I spent a little bit of time in the beginning talking about logistics and how large it is in our community. For better or for worse, what we need to do in a sector like that is we come up with strategies where we say, okay, how do we change this industry, this cluster that impacts so many people? So last thing I'll leave you with, because you'll hear this out in the ethers, traded versus local. So what does that mean? And this definition that I put here, most commonly, the traded sector consists largely of sectors of manufacturing industry, while the non-traded sector consists of locally rendered services like healthcare, education, retail, and construction. So what does that mean? In my thing is, I'm always trying to how, if somebody doesn't know what this stuff is, like, how do we break it down? And so the simplest way that we can do that is we can say, if we have an economy, and think about countries, because countries do this too, we're talking about it in a regional sense, but let's say we produce something and then we sell that outside of our borders, and then that money comes back within our borders. That is a traded industry, sort of, in just the simplest terms. You want more traded industry. So as we're playing with pathways, sectors, and these different examples that we're giving, we're looking at these definitions so that we can say, okay, how are we gonna get the most bang for our buck here? And so with that, that is my crash course in clusters and traded industries. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments? Does it make sense? Thank you. I see some heads nodding. And Carlos, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think these are all really important for us to, terms that we need to come to an agreement on using appropriately. And these are all really important things to talk about. Jackie, could these slides be made available to the group?
Absolutely, yes. And I think I see Louis has a hand up. Maybe we'll take one or two questions. We do have to move on because
we can take one because we have to jump to Mike.
Agreed.
Thank you for sharing your presentation. I don't know, Jackie, if this is for you or maybe just people on the call. Does anyone know if anyone's released any recent reports on the projected job growth / demand in key areas in the Inland Empire, such as education, health, medicine, business development, either using census data or other, especially in a post-COVID context?
Yes. So there's a lot of data. Mike probably is going to talk a little bit about this because I spend a lot of time on his website because I'm a fan of what they do. And I know that they just had a report that came out. So he probably will talk a little bit about that. But there's something that you said that I think is really critical. And that's that the post-pandemic economy, and if we're bold enough to say post, because we're still very much in it, but it does impact this work. This is all set, K through 16 SURF, which I talk a lot about. This is all set within the context of major sectors of our economy, major industries were disrupted. And how do we help shore those up? We've seen policies through CARE Act, ARPA funds, Build Back Better, Good Jobs Challenge. I could go on and on and on. Historic investment at the public sector to try to bring back some of these industries and make sure that that they're not gone forever. Probably if we were having this conversation, retail and tourism wouldn't be as huge, the hospitality industry. We would be thinking about, okay, we're looking at jobs where we can get folks into higher wages. But we all know what happened to that sector during the pandemic. So pandemic does matter with all of this conversation. I think the bottom line that I'd want to leave everybody with, and I'm going to turn it back over to Carlos, is we are all part of economic development. Each and every one of us, our actions are impacting the way that our economy functions and the opportunities that are available to our students, our residents, and our businesses. We are a part of all of this. So the more that we can understand that and know, like, okay, well, hey, maybe I should spend more of my time with this cluster versus this sector, because I know that I'm going to be able to move the needle. Or on the other hand, you say, look, I know I'm focused on cluster, but that doesn't mean that I'm not gonna work in healthcare, because that's really important right now in a post-pandemic economy. So with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
I'll put my contact information in the chat. I can talk about this stuff all day, but I got to turn it over to Carlos. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll put the slides on the website, the GIA website, for you to see. Thank you, Jackie. Mike Goss, I'm jumping over to you. Please answer Louis' question.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. So I'm going to get my presentation up, and I just dropped the link to the report that Jackie mentioned. So thank you so much for that, Jackie. Thanks for the plug. So it's in there for you guys to review. Let me see. Let's see. Okay, can you guys see my presentation?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I can't see my notes, which is interesting. Let's see. Okay. So today, I'm Michael Goss. I'm the director of the Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research. I am a grant-funded initiative from the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So I technically serve all 12 community colleges in the Inland Empire Desert region, which is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. But my grant is held at Chaffey College, but I do serve all 12 colleges. So as Jackie mentioned, what is industry cluster? So industry cluster really is just a group of industry sectors that provide all the necessary services to support the trade in the area. So as Jackie gave a great explanation of what sector industry clusters are. So I like to say also it's more of the way we think about how industries work rather than the way that they're studied. A good example of this is in transportation. So when we think of transportation, from the way we study it, we just really look at transportation, but it's actually larger, right? We need to look at manufacturing. Who's manufacturing the transportation and all the parts? All the transportation, all the support activities that go to support the transportation sector, the sales and rental aspect of it, and also the maintenance. So those are all different sectors that all go together to make the transportation cluster. And agriculture is another good example. So agriculture, we think of agriculture, when I think about it, I really just think it's the farming, but it's more than that. It's the farming, ranching, and it's the processing as well. So it's getting everything, out of the ground and into a can. And then it goes out to sales from there. So those are really what industry clusters are. So for this particular, I'm going forward like crazy. So we looked at these 4 sectors within the K-12 collaborative grant. So we looked at the health, education, engineering, and computing, and I'll describe what's going on in each one of these. So again, here's the health cluster. I'm showing here the historical projection of what happened 5 years ago, and then what we expect to happen in the next 5 years. So when we look at a health cluster, what we're looking at is it's all the healthcare services and also some biotechnology aspect to it as well. So all the biotech. So in 2015, we had about 145,000 jobs. In 2020, we had 166,000 jobs. We did have slight decline due to the pandemic. So we look right there in 2020, when we see on average, we saw that this sector was affected by the pandemic. But when we look forward to the next 5 years, we expect there to be 184,000 jobs. So we're going to increase by 11% and add 18,000 jobs. Now, when we look at industry sectors, when we look at industries, we're really just looking at jobs. So when we look at a job is counted whether it's the highest job, the C-level job in the industry, all the way down to the very bottom job, most entry-level jobs that support that industry as well. So when we look at this pie chart here, the healthcare industry, so when we think about healthcare, we're really thinking about those doctors and nurses, but that's really only 66% of the jobs within the this healthcare cluster. The other 34% are support jobs. So think about your institution that you work at. So if you work in education, people think you're a teacher, but you may not be a teacher. You may be working in administration. You may be working on the IT side. You may be working in payroll. So those are those types of jobs that go to support the activity of the sector. So it's important to say, do we want to look at the industry sector, or do we want to look at the jobs that are important to that sector? So here's some examples when we could tear apart the healthcare subsectors and look at the subsectors within there. Some of the booming subsectors, industry sectors within are the outpatient care. It added about 14,000 jobs over the last 5 years, grew by 202% in our area. In the next 5 years, projected to 2025, we expect to add an additional 5,000 jobs and grow by 24%. And this is a great sector because the average wage within the sector is $103,000 a year for each worker. Another example is especially hospitals. So this does not include psychiatric or substance hospitals. It's really specialty hospitals. So it may be cancer hospitals, it may be children's hospitals, very specific types of hospitals that do specific activities. So they're growing by 50%, adding 200 jobs in the last 5 years. In the future, we expect them to add just under 300 jobs, grow by 34%. Another great sector, $81,000 a year. That is the average job. And then when we dig into a little more, we want to look at the occupations. What types of workers work in these occupations? So these are example workers that they're primary healthcare. So the ones that you'd interact with if you needed healthcare within the sector. Nurses, great. It's going to expect to have almost 2,400 annual job openings. So that's job openings each year over the next 5 years. And this is due to not only job growth, but also replacement needs. So we're just going to need more. And this may not even include what we're hearing is we're hearing about a burnout factor in our healthcare sector. So there may be more opportunities coming up depending on how that shakes out if we continue into this pandemic. So the median wage for this one is $52.44 an hour. We look at a wage above $24.36 as a self-sustainable wage within this region. And the education level, it requires this little certificate. Sorry, I should put some label on there, but it's usually requires an associate degree, a community college level education, anything for the certificate. And an example of something that needs a bachelor's degree or higher is our medical and health services manager. So this is management within the hospitals. Expected to have just under 500 annual job openings and pays a hourly wage of just under $60 an hour. So looking at education, so not only is this education, so thinking about our public and private schools, but also our daycare centers. This is really a critical sector within education. So historically, it's added 300 jobs. We saw a little bit of a dip. Sorry, I can tell you the exact numbers, but I don't have my notes. But in 2020, it had 160,000 jobs, and it is projected to decline by 4% and lose 6,000 jobs. And this may not be because there's a decline in need for services. The pandemic may have adjusted the types of jobs that are needed, and they maybe have trouble getting those jobs back. So that's just it's an oddity going on right now with the sector. Colleges and universities, state government, they're projected. This is probably an example of Cal State, expected to add about 650 jobs over the next added 650 jobs in the last 5 years. Expected to add another 2,400 jobs in the next 5 years, and pays an average wage of about $85,000 a year. And then our elementary and secondary schools. So this is our elementary schools and your high schools that's probably close by to your house. Over the last 5 years, lost about 2,400 jobs, and we'll expect to lose about another 8,800 jobs over the next 5 years. But the pay is fantastic, just under $86,000 a year. Engineering is another sector we look at. So engineering, this basically includes all types of engineering and also technicians. It's expected it grew by about 3,000 jobs over the last 5 years. Expected to add another 1,000 jobs, grow by 7% in the next 5 years. And some good examples here is our engineering architectural services, and then our highway and street and bridge construction. And these may be projected upwards depending on how much funding we get from the infrastructure bill that passes the feds, goes to the states, and hopefully it'll trickle down to the Inland Empire area. And some great jobs in here. So electronic technicians expected to add just under 100 jobs and pay an average median wage of $34.92 an hour. And then in a higher level job, that bachelor's degree level up is the civil engineers. That's expected to have 303 jobs, and it's just about over $52 an hour. And lastly, the last one we're gonna look at is our computer sector. So this includes all computer sectors. So this includes some aspects of computer manufacturing, computer engineering, and also all the tech support software development that we have in our area as well. So this is like a big cluster of all the type of computer industry sectors that we have. It declined by 7% over the last 5 years, but we're expected to see a growth of 2% by 2025. So it's gonna rebound just a little bit. And good examples, and here are software publishing grew by 133% over the last 5 years and expected to grow another 33% over the next 5 years as well. Another one is computer system design, grew by 20%, expected to grow by another 11% over the next 5 years, all paying well over $100,000 a year on average for each job. And some good examples here are computer user support specialists. So these are people that help you, your basic tech support specialist, a community college level job, adding just over 300 jobs to the area, pays over just under $28 an hour. And then a higher level job is our software developers and quality assurance, expected to have just under 600 annual job openings and pays about $47 an hour. Some other resources I want to point to, we just released this high quality occupation resource for the Inland Empire for 2022, where we look at those 10 sectors, community college sectors, and we pick out the occupations that are highly connected to each one of those sectors and provide information on the occupations that are in demand, meaning they have at least 100 annual job openings each year, and also pay a self-sustainable rate over $24.36 an hour. So each one of these sectors. And we also highlight some of the occupations that meet either one of the criteria as well. So there may be less annual job openings, but there's still great opportunities because they pay well above the median wage, and vice versa. And then also I want to point out the mapping project. I just got an update today. We had about 13,000 views since we released it last year. And I will let you know we are deep in the work of redeveloping it and getting some new data in the map because programs have changed over the last year. So this is also a great resource for you to look at if you want to know which colleges have career education programs that relate to these sectors and which high schools also have these pathways that relate to these sectors as well. And then we can also see the employers that are nearby each one, and it provides a little bit of contact information for the employers as well, because we want to make those connections from education to employment.
Thank you, Michael.
Yep,
that was great. Please take down his information. Go to the website. A lot of this information is available for you to take a look at and understand. And this is going to be how we're going to make our case for the areas to focus on in this work. Just for the sake of time, we're going to jump over to Michael Wiafi, and he's going to talk about the recovery with equity recommendations. Sir.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Carlos. And it's you, Jackie and Michael are very difficult to come after. Can everybody see my screen okay? Is it
Yeah, it looks great, man. See it.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to kind of glide through here and talk a little bit about the Recovery with Equity Task Force. My name is Michael Wiafe, by the way, folks, and I know we've been chatting for a while.
We see the whole presentation mode.
Okay, so let me do it this way then. I think I know how to. If I do it like this, how is it appearing?
Yeah, that's better. Now we see just the presentation.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for letting me know. I was one of the lucky few, maybe not lucky, but one of the excited few to be part of the process of creating the Recovery with Equity recommendations. And the task force came together really out of the pandemic. Starting in summer of 2020, Dr. Lande Jose convened experts in higher education, equity, and innovation. And it includes students, faculty, administrators, and experts, practitioners, you name it, to come together and really think about the future of California's post-secondary institutions, looking to emerge from the pandemic stronger and better poised, really using this moment of systemic disruption from the pandemic to make some changes. And so I encourage you to look at the website. I'll put the link in the chat right when I get the chance. I should have had that prepared to dive a little bit more into it. And I realized that it says Senior Policy Advisor for Lande. She now works at the Public Policy Institute of California. So this task force report really was a roadmap for higher education. It's not a to-do list for one leader or an institution. It's a call to higher education segments and leaders across different institutions, thinking about the community as well. Really, it's looking at 11 actionable interrelated recommendations. They have policy and practice changes, resources needed in order to accomplish, and identifies next steps for policymakers, education leaders, other stakeholders engaging with students and in this space. Also, I want to also say, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I might not see them on time, but I'll answer them as soon as I can. So I know we just talked about these and I'm coming in with some education stuff, but just wanted to touch on to the statewide fastest growing jobs within California all require post-secondary credentials and touches on multiple different pathways. As part of the task force, we kind of went through some findings from the analysis in discussing with stakeholders. We went through some reports and got a lot of support with that. Some of the things that were found was that there is not enough financial aid or support for students' basic needs, that the cost of college is rising, the things that come along with that are rising, but the support is not. There are not clear pathways and processes for students to get through higher education systems. I think that's what we're all here kind of to discuss today and in the K-16 collaborative space, is that there are not clear pathways for students to follow. And that kind of is in conjunction with the lack of coherence between segments and institutions. We know that students are fluent between them. However, the support is not, and the type of things that they're able to experience on campus is not. And so how do you make this a cohesive experience for the student, even across institutions? Seats are limited. The longer a student stays on campus, the longer they take up a seat for someone else. We know that our economy needs these degrees in order to function to the extent in which we need them to. And so kind of getting students to the place where they need to go in a timely fashion is pretty important here. The last thing is constrained capacity to use data. And we know that there have been a lot of movements on this within the past few years. The create to career data system is starting to get off the ground, excuse me, as well as some others. But that's still kind of holding back our ability to fully evaluate kind of what's going on. Now diving into the fun stuff and the recommendations, and kind of thinking through the different type of things that needed to be done, we focused on 4 guiding principles. First is fostering inclusive institutions, looking at institutional cultures, cultivating environments that work for learners. One of the critical questions here are institutions and pathways creating environments that would support a student to be successful. The next is streamlining pathways to degrees. This is really hoping to eliminate administrative barriers to degrees and maybe breaking some of the bones that serve as barriers to students, the infrastructure bones. I wanted to just kind of put a little bit of a student experience in here. For example, if you went to Redlands High School, so this student is me, if you went to Redlands High School and did a dual enrollment program, which I did through Crafton Hills College, and decided to go to San Diego State, which is where I went to undergrad, those students didn't transfer over appropriately. And maybe not all students were like me and went to a CSU right out of high school. Maybe you went to a different community college and decided to transfer to a private. Maybe some of those units did not transfer appropriately. And so thinking about streamlining the pathways to degrees also make sure that students are getting the reward for the classes that they've taken, and ensuring that again, that process is streamlined and that institutions are on the same page. Facilitating student transitions by providing high-touch, high-tech guidance and improved preparations for access and success. Do not throw them towards 10 different advisors that might be across 2 different campuses to try to figure out, what courses they need to transfer. Students move fluidly through the system again, but the support does not. Simplifying supports for student stability. This is really done by packaging resources, making it simple for students. One of my favorite lines around this one is students really don't care where they get the resource. The question is, do they have the resource? And I think institutions sometimes can get too bogged down in who they provide the resource to, and are they our students, and et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that if you went to a community college in the Inland Empire, you're probably going to go to a UC or a CSU or private within the Inland Empire. Of course, that's not perfect, but I'm saying that community college students are CSU students, that community college students are UC students, that CSU students can also be UC students, and UC students can also be CSU students, but the support does not align in that same way. So diving a little bit into the recommendations, in concert with working groups and insights from extensive stakeholder engagement, these are the 11 sets of recommendations that were devised. The ones highlighted in red are the 7 for the K-16 collaborative grant program. And for the requirements, you have to choose at least 4 in order to qualify for the grant. And so keep that in mind. Of 4 of the 7 red. Maybe some of you are wondering how come, those other 4 that are not in red were omitted and maybe not for this program. A lot of that is that it's really difficult for region to act on some of these. State platform of services for students, an integrated admission platform. These are decisions that might be happening in the central system offices or at the state level. And maybe would be very difficult for regions to be able to take on. One thing I want to highlight around streamlining the college admissions process is that this one has already had movements. Governor Newsom already signed a bill 1111, that requires that community colleges put a common course numbering system in place by 2024, and looking towards and supporting some of the other recommendations on this list. So I'll drive through them pretty briefly. I know we're pretty short on time. First is improving faculty, staff, and administration. I'm diving into the 7 that are for the report, just not 11 that I mentioned that before I get in there. Improving faculty, staff, and administrator diversity. And this is done by a lot of ways, but developing innovative hiring practices, providing support for diverse employees, professional development, data collection, diversity goals, not being quiet about it as well. And that kind of leads over to cultivating inclusive, engaging, and equity-oriented learning environments achieved by upskilling bias and cultural competence training, and maybe changing curricula to be more current day, reflecting of the student needs, creating student channels to report issues and students having confidence in that, and focusing on adult and lifelong learning. There's again many ways in which we can fulfill these recommendations. So these are just some of the suggestions. Retaining students to inclusive supports. That could be inclusive programming, addressing how they feel on campus, focusing on campus climate, recognizing that our institutions don't exist in a vacuum, neither do students. The world comes into play, whether there's military activity in a student's home country. Faculty need to be able to manage those situations, and currently not all institutions have that support system in place. And that could be engaging faculty in student development outside the classroom, aligning cross-departmental support, and not doing DEI work in a silo or in secret. Include students in that work. Providing high-tech, high-touch advising. Chatbots have been a really popular tool that places across the country have been starting to use, focusing on data-based proactive support for students. Yeah, I think about how great it would be if there was the one advising center for the whole region, and you just put in what institution you go to and maybe what institution you're looking to transfer to, and you get specialized information in that way without having to go to multiple places. Support college preparation, early credit. As I mentioned before, some of the units might not match up depending on where the student's going, but then also that we don't have these programs uniformly across different high schools. Support this by providing college credit opportunities like the expansion of dual enrollment and providing more integrated solutions to the shared problems that we see. This one is interesting, I think. Subsidizing internet access for eligible students, working with local internet service providers, institutions engaging in that conversation, realizing that internet is as crucial. That is your textbook. That is your homework. That is the way that you access the resources that you need to be successful at this day and age, especially post-pandemic. And so thinking about subsidizing that access as those costs also are increasing. And this also kind of ties into improving college affordability, looking at the non-sticker prices, looking at transportation, but then also thinking outside the box. What are some of the paid experiential programs that might exist? Look at campus-based employment opportunities, maybe a campus-based minimum wage that's a little bit different than the region or the state. Look at ways that you can provide subsidized support for textbooks, learning materials, laptops, and other areas. So just some of the potential outcome measures that might come out from some of these to where we can look at ways to measure success. It can be student surveys, retention data, time to degree, graduation rates. There's a lot of ways in which we can do this. And I think there's flexibility here. A through G completion rates, early college credit attainment, I just want to end just by saying, as stakeholders across the state do the work, and core sets of outcome measures are tracking this, the real measure here, I think, is how successful the students are at the end, and how well are they able to access the pathways. How much does it help them? The reality is, as much as we can sit around and think about the best ways to measure our success, it's going to be shown in the students, and this whole process was rooted in that. I know I went through that really quickly, and I know that the chat was bustling. And so I want to be able to just take a quick peek and see if we have maybe one question. I don't know if we have time for that, Carlos.
And we have time for one quick question here from Michael. I have a question, Michael. Which one of these do you think would be the most important for us to look at as a region, just based on where you are now?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I've thought a lot about this. For me, it's retaining students through inclusive supports. I think it's thinking about what supports exist on campuses that are going to get students to stay. That's going to get them to feel at home, tell the story to their family and their friends. I think that kind of ties in with a lot of the other areas. And so it's hard to pick a single one and not talk about the others. But I think if I were to pick just one, it's retaining students through inclusive supports.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. We will get these presentations on the K-16 collaborative website at the GIA is hosting. And I think that this is a great start. We will be working on an action plan. We will be reading through the proposal again. I encourage you all to take a look at that and ask questions. And we will have a plan for you at our next Friday meeting. About how we're going to proceed. We will probably be reaching out to many of you during the course of the next week, just trying to find out more about some ideas, and we'll see you here next week. Please feel free to reach out to any of the folks on the team that presented today, or that are a part of the GIA group that's here, and we will answer your questions as best as we can. And I thank you so much. I will stay on a little longer if there are people who have questions, but we are